June 6, 1944. Auschwitz-Birkenau, German-occupied Poland. The morning arrives with the acrid smell of burning flesh that has become atmosphere, not anomaly. In Barracks 14 of the Birkenau women's camp, Sarah Lieberman wakes to the same gray dawn that has greeted her for 8 months, each day indistinguishable from the last in its mechanical horror. She is 23 years old, Hungarian Jew, former medical student from Budapest, now prisoner A7734, according to the numbers tattooed in blue ink on her left forearm. The barracks hold 800 women in space designed for 200 horses. They sleep on wooden shelves stacked 3 high, 6 women per tier, bodies pressed together for warmth because blankets are luxuries reserved for those who still believe in survival. At 4:30 a.m., the whistles shriek. Roll call in the mud. But today, something is different. A Polish political prisoner named Kaminski, who works in the administrative office and has access to contraband newspapers smuggled by civilian workers, whispers 5 words that will detonate through the camp like delayed action explosive. The Allies have landed in France. Sarah Lieberman does not believe him, cannot believe him. Belief in Auschwitz is a commodity more scarce than bread, the context of systematic annihilation. June 1944 marks the apex of industrialized genocide. Auschwitz-Birkenau is operating at maximum capacity, processing Hungarian Jews with efficiency that would impress factory managers if the product were manufactured goods rather than corpses. Between May 15 and July 9, 1944, approximately 440,000 Hungarian Jews will be deported to Auschwitz. Of these, roughly 320,000 will be murdered in gas chambers within hours of arrival. The remainder, deemed temporarily useful for forced labor, will be worked systematically toward death through starvation, disease, exhaustion, and random violence. The camp administration has refined genocide into science. New railway spur built directly into Birkenau allows trains to unload passengers mere meters from crematoria. SS doctors conduct selections on the ramp with practiced efficiency. Left for gas chamber, right for labor camp. The process from arrival to cremation averages 90 minutes. 4 gas chambers operate simultaneously. 5 crematoria burn continuously, smoke visible for kilometers, ash falling like gray snow over surrounding Polish countryside. Sarah Lieberman survived initial selection because she lied about her profession. When SS doctor asked occupation, she said seamstress rather than medical student. Educated Jews were considered dangerous, potential resistance organizers. Seamstresses were useful. That lie bought her life for precisely the duration of her usefulness. She now works in Canada, camp slang for warehouse complex where belongings of murdered Jews are sorted. Clothing, shoes, eyeglasses, prayer shawls, children's toys, photographs of families who no longer exist. It is simultaneously best and worst work assignment. Best because access to goods means possibility of barter for extra food. Worst because handling wedding rings and baby clothes of people murdered hours earlier destroys something in the soul that starvation cannot touch. The psychological architecture of Auschwitz is designed to eliminate hope systematically. Guards cultivate atmosphere of arbitrary violence where survival depends on luck rather than effort. Prisoners who maintain hope are considered dangerous by SS because hope implies futurity, and futurity implies survival, and survival implies resistance to the fundamental purpose of the camp, absolute annihilation. Therefore, hope must be murdered before the prisoner. Kaminski's whispered news. The Allies have landed in France is not merely information. It is contraband more dangerous than smuggled bread. It is hope, and hope in Auschwitz is capital offense. The collision between rumor and systematic despair. Sarah does not immediately share Kaminski's news. In Auschwitz, trust is currency spent carefully. Information can be weapon, barter goods, or death sentence depending on who possesses it. She observes throughout morning watching for confirmation. If news is true, there will be signs. German guards more nervous. Camp administration more brutal as fear makes them vicious. Perhaps whispers among other prisoners with access to outside information. By midday roll call, she notices subtle changes. The SS Blockführerin, who normally conducts roll call with mechanical indifference today, shouts with particular fury, striking prisoners for infractions invisible to human eye. Guards cluster in small groups, speaking in low voices, expressions tight. These are not behaviors of men confident in victory. These are behaviors of men who know something has changed in the calculus of war. That evening, after 12-hour shift sorting belongings of the dead, Sarah returns to barracks to find small group of women gathered around Marta Goldstein, Czech Jew, who worked as translator before deportation and now works in camp office, where she occasionally glimpses German newspapers. Marta is speaking Hebrew, language guards do not understand, and her voice carries tremor of suppressed emotion that in normal world would be called joy, but in Auschwitz is simply dangerous. They landed at dawn, American, British, Canadian forces, Normandy beaches, thousands of ships. The Germans are saying it's invasion, not raid. They're calling it decisive battle of the war. Marta's hands shake as she speaks. The newspaper said, "Our forces are courageously resisting the enemy onslaught." That's German for "we're losing." The women receive this information in silence that is not quite belief and not quite disbelief. It exists in psychological space that Auschwitz has created, the space where mind protects itself from both hope and despair by refusing to commit fully to either. One woman, Esther Rosenbaum from Krakow, speaks the question all are thinking: how long? It is question with no answer. How long from Normandy to Berlin? How long from invasion to liberation? How long can prisoners already skeletal, already ill, already dying survive? How long before SS, knowing defeat is inevitable, accelerate extermination program to murder all witnesses? How long before hope becomes another form of torture? Sarah Lieberman does not speak. She lies on her wooden shelf that night, calculating. From France to Poland, 1,500 kilometers. Soviet forces approaching from east, currently in Belarus, approximately 800 kilometers distant. Will liberators arrive before she starves? Before typhus kills her? Before random selection sends her to gas chamber? The first fracture in the certainty of death. June 10, 1944. 4 days after D-Day. 4 days. Information continues arriving through underground network of prisoners with access to German communications. Polish political prisoners in administration, Jewish Sonderkommando forced to work in crematoria, who occasionally glimpse discarded newspapers, civilian Polish workers employed in camp factories who smuggle news from outside world. The news is contradictory, fragmentary, impossible to verify. Allies have established beachhead. Germans are counterattacking. Thousands of casualties on both sides. The front line is moving, but in which direction? Each rumor spawns interpretations, hopes, fears. Some prisoners begin calculating survival probabilities with desperate mathematical precision. If Allies advance 5 kilometers daily and distance to Poland is 1,500 kilometers, liberation arrives in 10 months. Can I survive 10 months? But Auschwitz is accelerating, not decelerating. Hungarian transports continue arriving. Gas chambers operate continuously. The camp administration, far from preparing for defeat, is expanding operations. New crematoria are being constructed. Selections are becoming more frequent. It is as if SS has decided that if Third Reich is dying, it will complete its primary mission, extermination of European Jewry before collapse. Sarah Lieberman witnesses this acceleration personally. On June 12th, she watches as entire transport of Hungarian Jews, approximately 1,500 people, mostly women and children, is sent directly from railway ramp to gas chambers without even token selection for labor. The process is so rapid that crematoria cannot keep pace. Bodies are burned in open pits dug near Birkenau fence, flames visible day and night, smoke that makes breathing torture. That evening, Marta Goldstein shares new information, voice hollow. I saw German military telegram. Wehrmacht is requesting all available divisions be sent to France. They're stripping other fronts. The telegram used word critical. She pauses, then adds what everyone already knows. But they're not slowing down here. They're speeding up. They want to finish the job before they lose. This is the terrible mathematics of genocide in its terminal phase. Perpetrators know they are losing war, but believe they can still win the war within the war. The extermination project that is Nazi Germany's ideological core. The question facing prisoners is not simply whether Allies will liberate camps, but whether liberation will arrive before the last prisoner is murdered. Esther Rosenbaum, who has been silent since initial news of invasion, speaks words that crystallize the moral paradox. We are in race between liberation and extermination, and we cannot run. We can only wait and die slowly, hoping we die slowly enough. The psychological consequences of hope in hell. Hope, it turns out, is not simply positive emotion. In Auschwitz context, hope is complex psychological weapon that can heal or destroy. Before D-Day news, many prisoners existed in state of numb acceptance, not quite resignation but absence of futurity. They lived minute to minute, day to day, without projecting consciousness forward because forward contained only death. This psychological contraction was survival mechanism. Don't think about tomorrow because tomorrow will be worse than today, and day after will be worse still. Until finally, there is no day after. Kaminsky's whispered news, the Allies have landed in France, punctures that protective numbness. Suddenly futurity exists. Prisoners begin imagining liberation, returning home, reuniting with family members they hope survived, eating real food, sleeping in real beds, living without constant proximity to death. These fantasies are simultaneously sustaining and torturous because they make present suffering more unbearable by contrast. Sarah observes the psychological bifurcation among prisoners. Some embrace hope desperately, interpreting every rumor optimistically, calculating liberation dates, making plans for reunion with family. These prisoners become animated, talking about future, sharing pre-war memories, maintaining hygiene as if appearance still matters. They are preparing to survive. Others reject hope violently. They have survived 8 months, 12 months, 18 months by refusing to imagine tomorrow. Hope threatens the psychological armor that keeps them functional. These prisoners become angry when others discuss invasion, calling it cruel fantasy, propaganda, delusion. The Germans will never let us live, they say. We know too much. We've seen too much. They'll kill us all before they surrender. Both responses are rational. Both are survival strategies. And both may be correct simultaneously. Allies might liberate camps, but individual prisoners might not survive long enough to be liberated. On June 15th, Marta brings news that intensifies the psychological torture. Radio broadcast said Allies are advancing. They've captured Carentan, pushing toward Cherbourg. Then, in whisper, but I also saw transport list. 8 trains arriving this week from Hungary. 40,000 people. The juxtaposition is unbearable. Liberation approaching at walking pace while genocide accelerates to sprint. It is race between historical forces, and Jewish prisoners are simultaneously spectators and stakes. They cannot influence outcome. They can only exist in suspended animation between hope and horror, waiting to learn whether liberation or crematorium claims them first. Sarah Lieberman makes decision that night. She will survive. Not because survival is likely, statistically it is not, but because alternative is accepting death, and acceptance is surrender to SS worldview that Jewish lives are worthless. The subplot of resistance through information. Information in Auschwitz is not merely knowledge, it is resistance. Every newspaper smuggled into camp, every whispered update about Allied advances, every confirmation that outside world still exists and is fighting back, all constitute acts of defiance against Nazi effort to create totalizing universe where only SS power is real. The underground information network in Auschwitz is remarkable achievement of coordination across linguistic, national, and religious barriers. Polish political prisoners have access to German administrative offices. Jewish Sonderkommando working in crematoria occasionally find hidden letters and clothing of victims. Czech prisoners working in SS canteen overhear conversations. French prisoners receive news through civilian workers from Silesian villages. All these fragments flow through invisible network, translated, verified when possible, distributed to prisoners who can be trusted. David Cohn, Hungarian Jew working as electrician in camp maintenance, becomes central node in this network. His work assignments take him throughout camp complex, providing cover for information distribution. He memorizes news rather than writing it. Written information is death sentence if discovered, and recites updates in Hebrew, Yiddish, Polish, German, Hungarian, depending on audience. On June 18th, David brings electrifying news. Soviet offensive has begun in Belarus. They're moving west. Two-front war now. Allies advancing from west, Soviets from east. The Germans cannot defend both fronts. He pauses, then adds calculation that everyone immediately understands. Soviet front is 800 kilometers from here. If they advance 10 kilometers daily, they arrive in 80 days. September. September. The word reverberates through barracks like prayer. Can prisoners survive until September? The calculation becomes obsession. Women begin marking days on hidden scraps of paper, counting down. 80 days, 79 days. Each sunrise is victory. Survived one more day. Liberation one day closer. But the SS notices changes in prisoner behavior. Hope makes prisoners less compliant, more willing to risk small acts of defiance. Prisoners who formerly avoided eye contact now meet guards' gaze. Whispered conversations continue despite orders for silence. Camp administration responds with increased brutality, random beatings, surprise selections, reduced food rations. On June 22nd, the SS conducts massive selection in women's camp. 2,000 women deemed unfit for work are sent to gas chambers. Sarah Lieberman survives, barely. She is young, still physically capable of labor, her emaciation not yet terminal. But Esther Rosenbaum, who spoke eloquently about race between liberation and extermination, is selected. She walks toward crematorium with head high, singing Hebrew psalm in clear voice. It is act of resistance, dying on her terms, not theirs. That night, remaining prisoners whisper the date. 74 days until September. The weight of impossible moral calculations. July 1944 brings crisis of conscience that has no resolution. News of Allied advances continues. Cherbourg captured, Allies breaking out of Normandy, Soviet offensive smashing through Belarus. But simultaneously, Auschwitz extermination accelerates to levels unprecedented, even by camp's horrific standards. Hungarian deportations peak. Up to 10,000 people per day are being murdered. The crematoria cannot handle volume. Open pit burning operates continuously. Sarah Lieberman faces impossible choice. She works in Canada warehouse where access to goods allows limited barter economy. A piece of bread can be traded for information. A pair of shoes can be traded for medicine. Gold jewelry can potentially bribe guard for reduced work detail, extra ration, survival advantage that might mean difference between life and death. But Sarah has discovered something hidden in lining of suitcase. Diamonds, small stones, easily concealed, immensely valuable. They represent survival currency. Could bribe guard, trade for food, perhaps even purchase transfer to less deadly work detail. But they also represent moral dilemma. The suitcase belonged to Hungarian Jewish family murdered 2 days ago. The diamonds were their survival plan. Failed. Taking diamonds means profiting from genocide. Not taking diamonds means dying from misplaced moral principle when staying alive is only meaningful resistance left. She takes the diamonds, then vomits from self-loathing. Survival in Auschwitz requires moral compromises that in normal world would be unthinkable. Prisoners steal from each other. They betray each other for extra ration. They collaborate with guards to maintain privileged positions. They watch others die without helping because helping would risk their own survival. And they live with guilt that is sometimes heavier than starvation. Marta Goldstein, working in camp office, faces different impossible choice. She has discovered transport schedule showing that 10,000 Jews from Lodz ghetto will arrive next week. She knows they will be told resettlement for work lie. She knows they will be murdered immediately. She has means to get warning message to ghetto through civilian worker. But warning would reveal source of information, compromise entire intelligence network, result in executions of everyone involved in information distribution. Does she warn 10,000 people who will almost certainly die anyway, destroying network that provides hope to tens of thousands of current prisoners? Or does she stay silent, preserving network, allowing 10,000 to die in ignorance? She stays silent. The guilt will haunt her for remaining 60 years of life. But in calculus of impossible choices, she chose many over few, hoping living prisoners could be sustained long enough for liberation to matter. These are not choices that should exist. But Auschwitz is place where human morality breaks down, where every option is contaminated, where survival itself requires complicity. The escalation of summer, 1944, July 20th, 1944. News electrifies camp. Assassination attempt on Hitler. German officers tried to kill him with bomb. The attempt failed, but its existence proves Wehrmacht itself is fracturing. David Cohn distributes information in whispers. The German military is turning against Nazi leadership. The regime is collapsing from within. This news transforms prisoner psychology in ways different from Allied military advances. Military victories are external, abstract, distant, but assassination attempt proves Germans themselves recognize defeat, are desperate enough to attempt tyrannicide. It suggests not merely that Allies might win, but that Third Reich is experiencing internal disintegration. The SS reaction confirms the news. Guards are nervous, suspicious, conducting sudden inspections, beating prisoners for infractions previously ignored. Camp administration receives telegrams constantly. Rumors circulate that Himmler himself visited Auschwitz recently, ordering acceleration of extermination program before political situation deteriorates further. But July also brings unexpected development. The transport's slow. Hungarian deportations have largely concluded. Fewer trains arrive. The gas chambers, for first time in months, operate at reduced capacity. This is not mercy. It is logistics. Hungary's Jews have been largely exterminated. Other Jewish populations are either already murdered in hiding or beyond German reach as frontiers contract. Sarah Lieberman allows herself dangerous thought. Maybe she will survive. Soviet forces are now in eastern Poland, approximately 300 kilometers away. Allied forces are racing across France. The military situation is deteriorating rapidly for Germany. If she can survive 6 more weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, liberation might arrive before disease, starvation, or random violence kills her. This thought terrifies her more than resignation to death, because now she has something to lose. Before, death was inevitable. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps next week. Timing uncertain but outcome guaranteed. Now survival is possible, which means death would be tragedy, not inevitability. Every selection, every illness, every random guard violence becomes unbearable because she might survive, if she can just endure slightly longer. On July 24th, Marta shares news with group of women. Allied forces are approaching Paris. Soviet forces have liberated Majdanek. She pauses on second sentence. Majdanek is extermination camp in Lublin, 200 kilometers from Auschwitz. Soviet army has seen gas chambers, crematoria, evidence of genocide. The world will know. The Germans can no longer pretend. One woman asks question everyone thinks, what will they do to us now that world knows? Will they let us live as witnesses, or kill us all to destroy evidence? No one has answer. They can only wait, count days. Hope liberation arrives before SS decides dead witnesses are preferable to living ones. The convergence of hope and existential terror. August 1944. The military situation deteriorates catastrophically for Germany. Paris liberated. Romania switches sides, joining allies. Soviet forces advance through Poland at speed that suggests German defense is collapsing. Wehrmacht is fighting retreat on all fronts. But Auschwitz continues operating. Reduced capacity but still murdering, still burning, still destroying evidence. Prisoners watch SS frantically destroying records, dismantling equipment, preparing for something. Evacuation, massacre, or simply chaos of collapse. Sarah Lieberman has lost 20 more kilograms. She weighs approximately 40 kilograms now. Starvation is killing her slower than gas chamber, but equally certainly. Typhus is spreading through camp. Dysentery, tuberculosis. Women are dying in barracks during night. Corpses discovered at morning roll call. The question is no longer whether she will be murdered, but whether she will die of natural causes first. On August 15th, David Cohn brings astonishing news. Allied forces have landed in southern France. Second invasion. The Germans are being crushed between 3 armies. Western allies from Normandy, Southern allies from Mediterranean, Soviets from East. His voice breaks with emotion rarely shown in Auschwitz. It's ending. The war is ending. That night, prisoners in Sarah's barracks discuss what liberation will mean. Where will they go? Most have no homes to return to. Families murdered, property seized, communities destroyed. They are stateless, homeless, orphaned. Liberation will not restore what was lost. It will simply end active killing. Marta Goldstein, always pragmatic, raises uncomfortable question. What if SS decides to kill all prisoners before allies arrive? Destroy evidence? Prevent testimony? The silence that follows is acknowledgement that possibility is very real. SS has already massacred prisoners in other camps as Allied forces approached. Auschwitz contains tens of thousands of witnesses to genocide. Allowing them to survive would be Nazi admission of crimes. The prisoners discuss resistance. Should they prepare uprising? Sabotage? Escape attempt? But they are starving, unarmed, surrounded by guards. Resistance would be suicide. And yet, dying fighting might be preferable to waiting passively for liberation or massacre. Sarah makes decision. If SS begins systematic massacre of remaining prisoners, she will fight. with bare hands if necessary. She will die as human being making choice, not as victim accepting fate. It is not strategic decision. She cannot affect outcome, but moral one. After months of forced passivity of surviving through compliance, she will reclaim agency and final act, even if that act is futile violence. She shares decision with others. Some agree. Some prefer to wait, hope, pray. Both choices are valid. Both are forms of resistance against system designed to rob Jews of humanity. Choice, dignity, preparation for the final reckoning. September 1944. Soviet artillery can be heard in distance. Low rumble like thunder that never stops. Prisoners stand during roll call, listening to bombardment approximately 50 kilometers away, calculating days until liberation. The sound is simultaneously most beautiful and most terrifying thing they have heard. Beautiful because it means rescue, terrifying because it might arrive too late. Camp administration is visibly panicking. SS officers are burning documents in courtyard, stuffing files into crematoria, destroying evidence with same industrial efficiency they applied to murder. Guards are nervous, trigger-happy, beating prisoners for glancing wrong direction. Rumors circulate that Himmler ordered all camps evacuated before Soviet capture. But evacuated might mean death march, might mean massacre, might mean abandonment. On September 3rd, David Cohn brings critical information. Railway lines are being destroyed by partisan attacks. No more transports can arrive. We are last prisoners here. Whatever happens, happens to us. The implication is clear. SS must decide soon whether to evacuate, massacre, or simply flee, leaving prisoners alive. Sarah Lieberman is now critically ill with typhus, fever, delirium, weakness so profound she can barely stand. She should be in infirmary, but infirmary selection sends sick prisoners directly to gas chambers. She conceals illness, standing through roll call with help of other women who hold her upright, answering when number is called, returning to barracks where she collapses. Marta visits, bringing news. Soviet forces are 30 kilometers away, maybe 5 days, maybe 3. Sarah asks, "Will I survive 3 days?" Marta cannot answer. Sarah has survived 8 months in Auschwitz. She has outlasted 90% of Hungarian Jews deported with her. Liberation is days away, and she might die of typhus on the day before Soviet tanks arrive. The mathematical cruelty is unbearable. To survive systematic attempt at genocide, only to die of disease contracted during genocide, hours before liberation. It is tragedy that statistics cannot capture, that historical accounts reduce to number, but that represents individual catastrophe as profound as murder. That night, women in barracks take turns caring for Sarah, cooling her fever with water stolen from Campwell, sharing their bread rations though they are themselves starving, singing Hungarian songs she remembers from Budapest before war, before deportation, before Auschwitz destroyed world that created those songs. It is act of defiant humanity, maintaining care, compassion, solidarity in place designed to destroy all three. The SS wanted to reduce Jews to animals fighting over scraps. Instead, women dying of starvation nurse another woman through typhus, sacrificing their own survival margins to save one more life. The direct confrontation with mortality at liberation's threshold. September 7, 1944. Artillery is constant now, shell explosions visible on horizon. Soviet forces are engaging Wehrmacht defenders approximately 15 kilometers from camp. The SS is preparing evacuation. Orders are confused, contradictory. Some guards preparing to flee, others preparing to march prisoners west, others apparently preparing for massacre. That morning, Camp Commandant Rudolf Höss calls assembly. All prisoners capable of walking must prepare for evacuation. March begins in 12 hours. Anyone too weak to march will remain in camp under guard. The announcement is death sentence thinly disguised. Those who cannot march will be killed, and those who march will likely die during death march. Sarah Lieberman cannot walk. Typhus has destroyed her strength. She will remain in camp with approximately 6,000 other prisoners too sick for evacuation. The remaining prisoners know they are being left to die, either murdered by guards before SS flees, or abandoned to starve in camp with no food, no water, no care. Marta must march. She is still physically capable, which means she must go. The women say goodbye without sentimentality because sentimentality is luxury they cannot afford. Marta simply says, "Survive. Tell what happened here." Sarah nods. What else is there to say? That afternoon, approximately 60,000 prisoners begin marching west from Auschwitz. They walk in columns, guarded by SS, increasingly desperate as Soviet forces advance. Over following weeks, approximately 15,000 will die during march from exhaustion, starvation, execution of those who fall behind. It becomes known as Death March, final act of genocide disguised as evacuation. Sarah and 6,000 remaining prisoners wait. They expect SS to return, machine gun barracks, eliminate witnesses before Soviet arrival. Instead, they hear silence. The guards have fled. Auschwitz is abandoned. For 3 days, prisoners exist in limbo. No guards, no food, no water. Artillery grows louder. Some prisoners die during this period, surviving genocide only to die of starvation during final days. Others explore camp freely for first time, walking into SS administrative buildings, finding food stores SS left behind, discovering extent of documentation that proves genocide, transport lists, death certificates, records of Zyklon B deliveries. On January 27, 1945, 4 months after artillery first rumbled in distance, 19 weeks after D-Day news arrived, Soviet soldiers of 100th Infantry Division enter Auschwitz. They find approximately 7,000 prisoners alive, barely. They find crematoria. They find gas chambers. They find rooms filled with hair, shoes, eyeglasses. They find evidence of industrial genocide on scale that defies comprehension. Sarah Lieberman is among survivors found by Soviet soldiers. She weighs 36 kilograms. She has typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis. Medics say she will die within days, but she survives. The apex of survival and impossible memory. The liberation of Auschwitz is not cinematic moment of joy. It is confusion, continued dying, administrative chaos. Soviet army was advancing to Berlin, not liberating camps. Discovery of Auschwitz is accidental, almost incidental to military operation. The soldiers are unprepared for what they find. Thousands of living corpses, evidence of crimes beyond their conceptual framework. Sarah Lieberman cannot walk, cannot speak coherently. Typhus fever has created delirium where she cannot distinguish between reality and nightmare. Soviet medics evacuate her to field hospital in Katowice, 40 kilometers away. She receives first medical care in 8 months. Intravenous fluids, antibiotics, clean bed. But her body has been damaged so profoundly that recovery is not certain. She survives. Barely. Recovery takes months. By April 1945, when she is physically stable enough for conversation, war in Europe has ended. Hitler is dead. Nazi Germany has surrendered. The genocide is over. But Sarah's testimony begins. Soviet authorities, then later British and American investigators, interview survivors. They take statements. They document crimes. Sarah describes what she witnessed. The selections, the gas chambers, the crematoria, the systematic murder of Hungarian Jews, the acceleration of genocide, even as Germany was losing war. Investigators are skeptical, not because they doubt genocide occurred. Evidence is overwhelming, but because scale seems impossible. 440,000 Hungarian Jews murdered in 8 weeks? How is that logistically possible? Sarah shows her tattoo, A7734. She explains numbering system. She provides names of SS officers, describes layout of camp, details procedures of murder with precision that only witness could possess. She also describes June 6, 1944, day she heard Allies landed in France, the hope that news created, the terror that hope intensified, the impossible waiting while liberation approached and genocide accelerated simultaneously, the women who died 1 day, 1 week, 1 month before Soviet arrival, the mathematical cruelty of surviving genocide only to die on threshold of liberation. Investigators ask, why did Germans continue genocide when losing war? Sarah answers with questions she has contemplated for months. Because genocide was not consequence of war. War was means of genocide. Hitler wanted Jews extinct. When he could not win war, he accelerated murder to complete that project before defeat. Military logic is incomprehensible here. Ideological logic explains everything. It is insight that will shape Holocaust historiography for decades. Understanding Nazi regime as fundamentally genocidal project that used military conquest as tool for racial extermination, not empire, that committed genocide incidentally during territorial expansion. Sarah's testimony becomes part of documentary record. But she knows documentation cannot capture experiential reality. What it felt like to hear about D-Day while standing in Auschwitz, calculating whether you would die before liberation arrived. The moral revelation of hope's double edge. May 1945. Sarah Lieberman sits in displaced persons camp in Germany, surrounded by other survivors trying to comprehend what survival means. She is alive. Approximately 200,000 Hungarian Jews survived out of 825,000 who lived in Hungary before deportations. Her parents murdered. Her 3 siblings murdered. Extended family of 43 people, murdered except for one cousin who survived Bergen-Belsen. She learns that Marta Goldstein survived Death March, liberated by American forces in April. David Cohn did not survive, executed during March when he could no longer walk. Esther Rosenbaum, who spoke eloquently about race between liberation and extermination, was murdered in gas chamber on June 22, 1944, 7 months before Soviet liberation. Sarah calculates obsessively. If D-Day had occurred 1 month earlier, would Esther have survived? If Soviet advance had been faster, would David have lived? If Hungarian deportations had been delayed by Allied bombing of railways, would her parents have escaped? The counterfactuals are torture. Small changes in historical timing could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. But the deeper revelation is about hope itself. Sarah realizes that news of D-Day, which sustained her through summer and autumn of 1944, also intensified suffering. Before June 6th, she existed in eternal present, not imagining future, because future was death. After June 6th, she imagined liberation, reunion with family, return to normal life. That imagination made present suffering more unbearable because it created contrast. Women who died in July, August, September 1944 died hoping for liberation. They calculated days remaining. They made plans for reunion. They maintained hope, and then they died. Hope unfulfilled, making their deaths not merely murders but tragedies of dashed expectation. Would it have been mercy not to know about D-Day? To die without hope? Sarah cannot answer. She knows hope sustained her, gave her reason to continue fighting starvation and disease. But she also knows hope made others' deaths more cruel by creating false sense that survival was imminent. The moral paradox is unresolvable. Hope was both weapon against despair and instrument of torture. It saved some and tormented others. There is no synthesis, no resolution, only acknowledgement that in extremity, even positive emotions become ambiguous, contaminated by context. Sarah understands. She did not simply survive genocide. She survived complex psychological warfare where hope and despair, resistance and collaboration, humanity and degradation existed simultaneously, and where survival required navigating moral territory that should never exist. The legacy of hope in the shadow of chimneys. Sarah Lieberman lived until 2012, dying in Tel Aviv at age 91. She spent 67 years after liberation trying to articulate what it meant to hear about D-Day while imprisoned in Auschwitz, but language repeatedly failed her. How do you explain to people who have never experienced absolute powerlessness what it means when news of distant military operation becomes only thing preventing complete surrender to death? She testified at Eichmann trial in 1961. She spoke at schools, universities, memorial events. She repeated her story thousands of times. And each time she returned to June 6, 1944, day that split her Auschwitz experience into before and after. Before, resignation to death. After, torturous hope that liberation might arrive before death. Historians analyzing Holocaust have focused extensively on mechanisms of genocide. The railways, the gas chambers, the bureaucracy of murder. Less examined is psychological experience of victims who lived in overlap between genocide and liberation. Months when rescue was approaching but not yet arrived, when hope and horror existed simultaneously. Sarah's testimony preserved that psychological reality. She described women marking days on hidden scraps of paper, counting down to liberation dates calculated from fragmentary news. She described the women who stopped counting, declaring hope was poison. She described the mathematical cruelty of dying weeks before rescue. She described survivors' guilt. Why did she live when women more worthy, more kind, more strong, more loving, died? The question, what did Jewish prisoners say when they heard Allies landed in France, has answer that is both simple and complex. Simple, they said, maybe we will survive. Complex, They experienced hope as double-edged weapon that sustained and tortured, saved and destroyed, made present suffering more bearable and more unbearable simultaneously. In end, approximately 6,000 prisoners in Auschwitz survived to liberation in January 1945. Tens of thousands died during those 7 months between D-Day and liberation, murdered in gas chambers, dead from starvation and disease, killed during death marches. They heard about Allied victory approaching. They calculated liberation dates. They made plans for reunion with families who no longer existed. They hoped, and they died hoping. That is what Jewish prisoners said when they heard Allies landed in France. They said nothing aloud, because speaking hope could be death sentence, but they thought perhaps maybe, if I can survive just a little longer, just until autumn, just until winter, I might see liberation. And some did, and most did not. And that is the history that numbers alone cannot tell. If this story made you understand how hope can be both salvation and torture in extremity, share it, because those who survived asked us to remember not just the facts of genocide, but the experience of living through it, waiting for rescue that came too slowly for most but just fast enough for some.